I think the areas that I'm still working on improving, I think that they've made me a more empathetic person. It's made me more open. It's made me less judgmental. It's made me more caring. It's made me more loving, I think, towards other people. I think sometimes after traumatic experiences, people can harden. And I felt like my heart just like turned to mush.
This is the Recovery After Stroke podcast with Bill Gassiamis, helping you navigate recovery after stroke.
Hello and welcome to episode 251 of the Recovery After Stroke podcast. My guest today is Suzanne E, who was in a motor vehicle collision that caused a trauma to her neck, which was missed during the post-accident medical checkup that later resulted in an ischemic stroke. Suzanne E, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you for having me, Bill.
Thank you for being here. Tell me a little bit about what happened to you.
So I had an ischemic stroke a little less than a year ago. So the reason I had the stroke was because I was in a car accident, and the car accident caused some trauma to my neck. And I had actually gone to the emergency center after the car accident, and they did a CT scan and they didn't find anything. They just said to come home and rest. They said I sprained my neck and that I'd be pretty sore, but that was it. And then 3 days later, that's when I had the stroke. And it was really intense. I mean, the car accident in itself was really intense. And then having the stroke 3 days later was a surprise. I didn't see that coming. And it completely changed my life.
You're not the first person who's told me this about a collision and then later on down the track, sometimes 6 months, sometimes a few months later, there's a tear in one of the vertebral arteries.
Mm-hmm.
Oh,
Yeah,
okay.
mine was my carotid artery.
Okay, right, okay. So it was a carotid artery dissection. Was it
Yeah.
an internal dissection? Did it create a flap and therefore that created a clot and then that moved forward? Or did it block at the site of the dissection?
My understanding was that dissection caused a clot. So the clot was forming after the car accident. And then the clot like fully formed 3 days after the accident. And that's when I had the ischemic stroke.
Okay, so the clot formed and then traveled up towards the head somewhere.
Mm-hmm. So I was, my memory of when the actual stroke happened is really patchy, but I was, so I had the car accident. I was pretty sore afterwards. They said I had a sprain in my neck, but that was it. I was honestly really frustrated about my car, but I wasn't thinking that much about my health. I was like, okay, I'm alive. Great. I felt like I walked away without a scratch, and I felt really lucky. And then 3 days later, I had gone back to work that day because I took the first 2 days off. And then I went back to work that day, and I was home, and I live with my roommate. And so she found me when I was having the stroke, and she called the ambulance. And then I went to the hospital, and then they performed surgery right away. So I felt like, it all happened so fast. I feel like 1 second I was fine, and then the next second I wasn't.
It's just amazing that I'm so pleased to hear that it all happened so fast, and that meant that you were in the right place at the right time, like you're in health, in a good place where they were going to support you, care for you, and make you feel better and make it possible for you to be here a year later, nearly.
Yeah, it was actually, the stroke happened when I was like mid conversation. We were talking, she was in the room right next to me, and I went to my room to grab something, and it felt like it was just, when you power down a computer, that's what it felt like in my brain. It just felt like everything was just shutting off. And then she found me, and she didn't know what was going on. And she, I couldn't move the right side of my body, and I wasn't talking. So she called the ambulance right away. And she suspected it was a stroke right away too. So the ambulance got there, and then they administered, I forget what it's called, but it's
PPA.
yes, they
Oh
administered
my
that at my
gosh.
house.
Wow.
They actually administered it right where I'm sitting right now because I'm sitting on my bed, but they administered it at my house, and then they took me to the hospital, and the hospital was actually only 10 minutes from where I live. So I was really, really close to the hospital, and they got me in surgery right away. So I had a stent placed in my neck.
Uh-huh. To support the tear inside your carotid
Mhm,
arteries so that it strengthens it. And then you've got a clear passage so that blood can continue to flow.
mhm.
Oh my gosh, it just it's overwhelming to hear how quickly it all happened for you. And you went
Yeah.
through it. I've been through my own version, and my one was very long, drawn out, extended, 3 years, brain surgery, like so many things happened over a
Mhm,
long period of time. You had it in a very short amount of time. And I
mhm.
imagine that, well, wow, like so much needed to, I don't get it at all. Like it's, you can tell
Me neither.
I'm flustered.
I feel incredibly unlucky for having it, and then I feel incredibly lucky for the recovery and
Yeah.
access to, like, healthcare that I had. I feel both, where it's like, on one hand, and it's really unlikely that I had a stroke in the first place, but then it's also really unlikely that I had all these things line up to where I could get care right away.
Yeah.
So, I feel really lucky that I'm here and that I'm alive, and that, because I got, um, care so quickly and I got rushed to the hospital so quickly, I think that that had such a big impact on my recovery because I had surgery right away. I hear a lot of stories where people, they don't get help for like 12 hours or a day or multiple days.
Mm.
Um, and,
Your roomie, high five to your roomie.
I know I owe her, my life, literally.
Wow, you can actually say that and mean it to her.
Yeah.
That's
And she's
fabulous.
my best friend too. We've
Yeah.
been best friends since we were like 12 or 13 years old. So
Why you chose well.
I did. This wasn't in our plan, but yeah.
Yeah. Wow. Wow. So, and then you're going through all this stuff, family, notifying people. How do you go from perfectly healthy today to I've got to tell people I've had a stroke and I'm in hospital? Did you navigate that? Did that happen at the same
No,
time? Was your friend involved?
that's a great question. I didn't navigate any of it because I wasn't verbal for the first little bit after my stroke, and I couldn't talk, and my brain wasn't like processing what was happening. Like I couldn't process that I had a stroke for the first couple of days. People kept telling me, and I kept asking again what happened. I couldn't, like when I could start talking, I kept asking what happened. So when it happened, my best friend who I live with still currently, and I lived with at the time of the stroke. So um, she's close with my family. We grew up together. So she was in charge of notifying and contacting everyone. And I actually am living in Austin, Texas, and my family's in Washington State. So they all got on a plane immediately, and they flew to Austin that same night. So they were there like within 24 hours of when I had the surgery. Um, so my memory is me waking up and my parents and my sister being there.
When your brain was shutting down in that zone, did you have any concerns about yourself, any fear, any thoughts about what was happening? I know a lot of stroke survivors comment that they had no idea what was happening. They didn't feel concerned or worried or anything like that. It's after they woke up when all that stuff started to come back. How did
Yeah.
you navigate that moment of, ooh,
It's a good question. I wish and I don't wish that I remembered it more, but it's very patchy for me,
yeah,
which is really confusing to kind of put the story together in my mind. But um, I remember, I just remember I was standing and I was going to grab something from my room. I don't remember what I was grabbing. And then I remember getting really dizzy, and I just remember falling over. and then there's this big patch where I don't have any memories. And then I remember patches of being in the ambulance, and I remember thinking I was dying, and that was terrifying. I felt like um, all my memories are also only on the because the right side of my body went offline. So the stroke was on the left side of my brain. So all of my first memories are on like the left side of the room, which
Uh-huh.
is really interesting too. But I just remember like looking at the EMT that was um, in the ambulance, and I was like, I'm dead. I'm dying.
Yeah, that's hard.
Yeah.
Uh,
But then I got to the hospital and I felt like um, I have so few memories in the hospital. I feel like I remember that I couldn't talk. I remember people were talking around me and rushing around me. And I remember lights, and I remember this flashing light from a CT scan that they did at the hospital. And I remember not knowing what was going on. I was terrified. I was really confused. But at the same time, like, I think because I don't remember so much, it was kind of like a blessing and a curse, because I think that it was really traumatic, and I don't have a lot of memory of it.
yeah, yeah. I was completely cognitively aware the first time I presented the hospital with a bleed in my head, and I knew exactly what was going on, and I was even acting like nothing was happening. And the doctors and nurses were concerned that I wasn't staying in my bed and that I was walking around and meeting people for coffee downstairs and all this stuff. And the second time I was really spaced out, felt like I was in a different dimension. Everything was just
Mhm.
kind of, I felt like I was moving through this dimension without knowing exactly where in it I was and how to interact with it. And it was just kind of like a floaty, wooey kind of thing. It was strange.
Mhm.
And I didn't know how to interact with the people around me. Do you recall interacting with the people who came to visit you, who flew in and having them there? And was it comforting to have people around you? Do you know how you interacted with them?
Yeah, I remember when I first got to the hospital, it felt like everyone was talking around me, but I couldn't understand what anyone was saying. Like, I could tell that they were talking to me. I could tell that they wanted me to say something, but I couldn't talk, and I didn't understand what they were asking. I just felt that there was like commotion and like chaos around me, but I didn't know what was going on. And then, but I remember my best friend being there. I remember knowing that she was there, and I remember knowing who she was. And then I remember waking up at some point, and my parents were there, and I think I just started crying when I saw them, because it was just like I was so scared. I didn't know what was happening to me, and I couldn't move the right side of my body, and I was so scared, and I couldn't talk then either. I think all I said was hi, because um that was like the speech that I could form. And but I was comforted that they were there. I remember I felt safe when they were there. Um but I also was like, oh, something really bad happened for them to be here, for them to be in another state, and for me to wake up in a hospital. Like, I knew something was really, really bad, but I didn't know what happened.
Yeah. What stage of life were you in? A lot of young people will tell me about having a stroke and they're in the middle of something major. Usually it's university or something big or even something minor, even moving out and living on your own with a roomie. They're all big times in our lives. No one's really going through a, oh, I wasn't doing much. There wasn't really anything happening. What stage of life were you in?
Yeah, well, I was, let's see, I graduated college a few years ago, kind of early on in the pandemic. And I started working full time in Washington State for a while. And I felt like I was just burnt out. I was kind of at a dead end job that I really liked my coworkers, but I wasn't really using my degree in the way that I wanted to. But I really enjoyed my job. And um, wanted a change. So I had recently moved to Austin, Texas, right before the stroke. I moved in June of 2022 and I had my stroke in August. So I had just moved to a new city. I didn't really know that many people. I had my best friend that was here, and I knew a couple people, my coworkers, but I didn't have a support system here yet. And yeah, it was really scary, like doing it away from home and having it happen away from home because I didn't have anything set up here yet. I felt like when I first moved here, I wanted just to be like young and in a new city. And I started working when I moved here. And so just felt like I was getting into the groove of things. I was working, I was starting to meet people, I was starting to make friends, I was starting to like explore a new city, and then just like bam, it happened.
Yeah. How long did you end up in hospital for?
I was in the ICU for 5 days, and then I was in like I was at the hospital for another 2 days, and then I was transferred to an inpatient rehab center.
And what
And then I
deficit?
was at the what was that?
Sorry, I interrupted you. Finish what you were saying.
Oh, and then I went to an inpatient rehab center, and then I did outpatient rehab for a really long time.
Yeah. And what deficits were you dealing with that you had to recover from?
Early on, well, things were changing so quickly. So early on, I couldn't move the right side of my body. Everything was, I couldn't feel anything. And I was talking at first, but it was really small sentences. I was getting really confused. Um, I felt like my processing still, I feel like I'm struggling with, but I felt like I couldn't process things. My memory was really affected. The stroke was located on the left side of my brain. So they said that the parts of my brain that dealt with language and fine motor control were affected. So I had to do a lot of physical therapy and a lot of occupational therapy and speech therapy. Um, so when I was in the hospital, I kind of started to say some words, and I was able to kind of regain some of the feeling in my body. Um, but once I got to the inpatient rehab center, that's when I really like worked on like walking again and moving around again and trying to hold a pencil again and like sign my name again and just like all those things that you never think you're going to have to relearn.
If you've had a stroke and you're in recovery, you'll know what a scary and confusing time it can be. You're likely to have a lot of questions going through your mind. Like, how long will it take to recover? Will I actually recover? What things should I avoid in case I make matters worse? Doctors will explain things, but obviously you've never had a stroke before. You probably don't know what questions to ask. If this is you, you may be missing out on doing things that could help speed up your recovery. If you're finding yourself in that situation, stop worrying and head to recoveryafterstroke.com, where you can download a guide that will help you. It's called 7 Questions to Ask Your Doctor About Your Stroke. These 7 questions are the ones Bill wished he'd asked when he was recovering from a stroke. They'll not only help you better understand your condition, they'll help you take a more active role in your recovery. Head to the website now, recoveryafterstroke.com, and download the guide. It's free.
Yeah, you're right-handed, obviously.
I'm right-handed, yes.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
That would be interesting. You're young, 25 is young, so you've got a lot of things going for you. When people are young and they have a stroke, they've got a lot more things going for them than if you were older, for example, in your 70s or whatever. There's less, potential for recovery, apparently, which is something that I hear that I don't really believe in anyway, that I tend not to like to say to people. But you're also in this phase where your identity is what it is, and you're just shifting and changing your identity because you've moved from home, you've moved to another state, you've moved into a place with a friend. So, there's all these things that you are doing. You're already going through a lot of upheaval, changes, and that type of thing. And now you're dealing with being in another state as well as the changes that are caused by this stroke, the thing that you haven't really, you weren't up for that part of it. You weren't interested in
No,
going down that part of it.
no, I wasn't.
How are you reflecting on yourself, and how's your identity being impacted when you've moved into that phase with the oh my gosh, I've got to learn how to ride again, and I've got to learn how to walk again, and all those things. How do you comprehend that?
I mean, it was terrifying. I think I didn't know what my future was gonna look like at that point because, like, previously I'd been fully independent and I could move around and I could drive and I could go to work and I had a really like relatively quote unquote normal life. Um, but after the stroke, when it first happened, I didn't know what my future was going to look like. I didn't know if I was going to be able to work full time again. I didn't know if I was going to be able to drive again. I didn't know if I was going to need like at home care for a long time or indefinitely. I just didn't know what that was going to be like. Um, I was really like fortunate though. My family, they kind of they flew down immediately after it happened, but then even after the immediate stay in the hospital, they were by my side. Like my mom would fly down and then she would go back and then my dad would fly down and then he would go back and then my sister would fly down and
Wow.
then I would have friends that would take care of me. And my best friend, who I live with and who found me when this happened, like she stepped in so much as my caretaker, and I had an outpatient care team that helped me too. So I was really fortunate. I had a lot of help, but it was still scary just not knowing. Um, like I had this idea of what my life was going to look like before the stroke, and all of a sudden, none of that was certain.
Yeah, yeah. Stroke tends to do that. You're going along perfectly fine one day, and then you're dealing with the most dramatic upheaval the next day, and then from then on. And even though you were brave, I'm going to say it's brave because I've never done it before. You were brave, and you left your home, and you went to another state, and you set up shop again. Without any resources of local knowledge or anything like that. You've just gone blind into this new way of doing things. It's you're not you have a certain amount of skills to do that, don't you? You know how to interact with people, you know how to get a job, you know how to pay a bill, you know how to do all the things that you need to do to sort of stay on your feet. You know all that. You've got that. But then you've got to deal with stroke recovery, and you've never done that before. You don't know how to
Mhm.
do any of that stuff. It's foreign to you. You may have heard about the term stroke, but you may not actually know what it means. And even though you've seen somebody who's had a stroke, you don't really know what they're going through. You've got no idea. So,
Yeah.
how did you go about discovering? How do you do that? How do you transition into I've got to recover from something I've got no idea about and I've never heard about and I am unaware of other than the fact that I'm living in it. How do you
I
how
mean,
do you, how do you do it internally? I know that other people are helping you, but like, how do
yeah.
you grapple with it?
I mean, it was terrifying, and I had, I had questions about everything the whole time I
Yeah.
was going through it, like, where I was just like, "I'm not strong enough to do this." Like, I felt really sorry for myself for a really long time, um, and I would just like, I wanted to just, like, throw in the towel and be like, "That's it. I'm done." Like, because everything that I was facing at the time, it just didn't seem like I feel really lucky because right now I feel like I've made a really good recovery. I definitely am not 100% back to where I was before, but I've been able to gain a lot of my independence back. But early on in the stroke, like that just wasn't a possibility, and that was terrifying. Um, I I think I don't know how to say this because I think that the stroke did change my life. Um, for the better in some ways though, because I think I created a new meaning on my life afterwards. I think my relationship with my family got a lot closer. I felt like um before the stroke, I there were so many things that were just like superficial that didn't matter that I was so wrapped up in, or just um I think I was just kind of lost before this all happened, and I definitely was lost when it happened. Definitely didn't help. But I think because of the nature of stroke, you have to rebuild your life. And I'm proud of how I've rebuilt mine.
Yeah, I would be too. And you've said something that a lot of stroke survivors say. But what's interesting is I said that at 37, that before stroke, my life was a little bit weird, strange, different, but it's actually normal. It's the way most people go about their life. I can reflect on it now because I've had this kind of, we'll call it, uh, my gosh, I don't even know what the word is, but I think what I'll call it is a growth. I'll call it growth, post-traumatic growth, maybe that's better.
Mhm.
And before that, I hadn't had any experiences that were my experiences physically happening to me that made me have to dig deep and find other ways forward. So I just went about doing things the way that I used to, and it was the way most people did it. And I thought it was okay, and I thought it was serving me well, but it really wasn't. But at 25, to have that insight, I think that's an amazing insight to have, because now that I'm 48, I reflect back on when I was 25, and I don't think that, even though, 25, I didn't know as much as I know now, and I wasn't as aware, as knowledgeable as I am now. I didn't know if I was that aware enough to be able to make the distinction that you've made, which is I was focusing on superficial things. Now I know what's important. I was focusing on all these things that didn't matter. Now I know what matters. Do you
I
feel
don't
like
think I would have gotten there unless this
either?
happened.
Okay.
I think that that's the nature of like when things happen that are
Right.
so unexpected and traumatic. I think like fundamentally like it kind of tears everything down, and you kind of have this. I felt like even before the stroke, I definitely struggled with my mental health, and um I wasn't always like I didn't always have the most like healthy relationship with substances. And then after the stroke, it was just I was so clearly not okay that I felt like I had to be so vulnerable. I had to ask for so much help. um and I actually had to like address a lot of things that I didn't address previous, like pre-stroke, that I had just been putting off and like
Wow.
numbing for years. But it was all of a sudden like, it felt like it was like scorched earth. And I felt like there was myself before the stroke, and then there was myself now. And I just like there wasn't any other option. Like I couldn't go back to that version of myself, or that version of me wasn't there anymore.
What a blessing.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I think I've created meaning from the experience. I wouldn't wish it on anyone, but I'm grateful to be here.
Yeah, yeah. I know I wouldn't wish on anyone either, but if you're going to get such a good thing out of a terrible situation, then bloody hell, why not? I don't know how to, and of course, I never want to see anyone unwell. Don't get me wrong. That's not it. It's just that ability to shift your perspective is never gonna that. I mean, it's exactly what I said. It's scorched earth. What what a start! Like fresh slate, everything new, rebuild however you want. Yeah, sure, you're going to take some of your old life into that new version, but you have really the opportunity to just let everything that didn't serve you go. And I love what you said about what I got out of what you said about your mental health, and
Yeah.
that you were using substances to numb it, right? And then you had to deal with it. Do you feel like the reason that you had substances in your life and you had mental health issues was because you didn't reach out for the help that all you had to do was reach out for?
Most likely. I mean, I think there was a variety of reasons, but definitely because of my pride, I think I just felt like it wasn't ever bad enough, or that like because I was still going to work, or because I was still, like functional, that like I didn't need help. And I was just kind of like living this like muted version of my life where, I wasn't really happy or fulfilled, but I was just like getting by.
Yeah.
So it felt like I never really like needed to. I mean, I had sought out like therapy before the stroke, which ended up being such a huge resource after the stroke. I feel like I couldn't have gotten through this without all of those resources. But yeah, there was just this sense where it was like I couldn't pretend that I was okay.
Anymore, because you definitely weren't. Yeah. I love that. That was me as well. I got to that point where everything that I was doing before stroke was kind of tending to my challenges, but not really solving them. And I
Mhm.
think what was lacking was my taking responsibility for the solution. So I was going to counseling, but I was kind of making it their responsibility to make me better.
Yeah, yeah, I
Yep.
was doing it so, like, half-assed. I don't know if I
Yeah.
can swear on this, but yeah, I
Yeah.
wasn't really, like, fully invested in it, and I didn't take it that seriously before this. And also when I'm 26 now, but when I was 25, right before it happened, in some ways I felt invincible. I felt like, the things I were doing were never gonna catch up to me in terms of, like, how much I was drinking, or just, like I just never thought of the impacts of it, um, which is so naive to say, but I feel like a lot of people that are younger feel that way. And then something with their health happens, and it's like, oh, I don't want that life that I had before.
Yeah. Look, I'm 48, but 25 was only a couple of blinks of the eye away. Like it's that quick. I mean, you just get to 48 and you look back and you go, oh my gosh, I was 25 just two blinks ago, like it's ridiculous how quickly you get to 48. Now, there's a lot that happens in between 25 and 48. So it's not like you haven't got a lot of additional stuff that's occurred, but time just seems to just go, right? So when you're saying when I was 25 and then I'm 26, even that feels like just a moment. Like it's even a quicker moment. But
Yeah, this has been the fastest and longest year of my life.
yeah, right. So it's time distorts in weird ways and changes, and the fastest because all of a sudden you're a year out of what happened, and that's like,
Mhm.
oh my gosh, I've made it a year out. But then it's like, oh my gosh, that was like just a year ago.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I don't know. I Even now, like, I still don't really know what my future looks like post-stroke. I feel like I still, am in very much, like, active recovery in a lot of ways.
Yep.
But I have been really grateful. I've gotten back to work recently, so I'm working again, and I have recently started driving again, which was huge for me. That was a big goal, um, after everything. So, yeah, I think I still have so many questions. I still don't know what I'm doing.
Yeah.
I still have, like, really bad days where I think sometimes I feel broken because of what happened,
Yep.
and then other times I'm really proud of myself, but it's so many highs and lows.
Yeah. I love that term broken. So some people are broken from stroke. They are. They're typically, specifically in a spot broken. It just depends on how you want to use that. If you want to use it as an analogy that's going to support you or discourage you. And if you're using it as a discouragement, then I would refrain from using that kind of language, right? But
Mhm,
it's kind of accurate in a way because there's something missing. Now, that something missing, that's what makes you unique. In my
mhm.
mind, now I have the ability to interact with people from all around the world at every single age, stuff that you and I would never have had in common before. No reason for us to, other than you're an amazing person and I'm a great guy, and we would chat because we're just good people, right? Other than that,
Yeah.
we would not really have any reason to get together and interact. But here we are. And I think that's kind of um, our injuries are what has given us this insight into this other way of doing life. And that is something that I am grateful for. And that part that's broken, if it wasn't broken, it wouldn't have allowed me to interact this way with 250 other stroke survivors around the world since the podcast started. So it just depends on when you're using those words, how you're using them and how you're making them impact you. And if they're, and I use it as a way to empower me to say, okay,
Mhm.
that little bit that's missing makes it possible for me to have really meaningful and deep conversations with other people that are going through the same thing. And what I'm doing is making a difference to them, and they're making a difference to me by chatting to me. And together, we're going to get through this. But we're also going to um, bring awareness, I suppose, or accept the down days as being part of the life of any person, quote unquote, normal or not, because
Mhm.
even before your stroke, you had really bad days that you couldn't get up. And you were even
Yeah.
doing it to yourself, right? Where you were drinking too much and then you'd have to deal with a hangover the next day. We do that to ourselves regardless of whether or not we've had a stroke. So you're just doing now your quote unquote bad days is just happening through a different source or cause, or does that make sense?
Yeah. Yeah, I think it's interesting, like, I think I'm trying to think how to word this. I think the areas that I'm still working on improving, um, I think that they've made me a more empathetic person. It's made me, more open. It's made me, less judgmental. It's made me more caring. It's made me more loving, I think, towards other people. I think sometimes after traumatic experiences, people can harden, and I felt like my heart just, like, turned to mush. Like, I felt so emotional. I felt like I couldn't yeah, I didn't expect to feel that way, to everything around me. It just felt like, yeah, everything was so intense.
You can't ignore it anymore. You could have
Mhm.
put it on the shelf before, ignored it, pretend it wasn't really talking to you, it wasn't giving you any feedback. You could consciously block out what the heart was saying and what it was doing. Whereas now the head is offline. So the heart's going, ha, here's my opportunity. I'm coming up and I'm going to tell you what you needed to hear, baby.
Yeah. And I was also like, I really had to like learn how to sit with the sadness and the grief of having a stroke and what that um meant for me at the time. But I think you can't you can't selectively numb emotions. Like you can't shut off grief without also shutting off like joy and love in your life. So I think for a while I'd just been like doing that. I had just been shutting it off, just kind of going about my day to day. And then after this happened, like I finally had to process a lot of the sadness from the stroke, but also from stuff that happened prior. And I think it allowed me to also like feel joy in my life in a deeper sense. I feel like I have a different appreciation for things now.
That's probably one of the most profound statements I've heard in all the podcast interviews that I've done. That's the statement that you made, that you can't just independently shut off different emotions and not impact other ones.
Mhm. I heard it somewhere. I didn't create it myself.
Yeah, that's okay. Everything we've ever said, we've heard somewhere else. It's all good.
Yeah.
Um, but it's just a profound statement that you've made. I completely agree with that, because that's what a lot of people do, is they might have an emotional hurt or pain or suffering from parts of their life that is in the past. And what they do is they try to compartmentalize it, put it aside, try and push it away instead of dealing with it. And then it takes away everything else from their life, and it makes them unhappy, and it makes them unable to experience joy and happiness and all these other things, because joy and happiness is an emotion of the heart as well. It's
Mm.
if you can't access, if you put a wall around your heart, well, then you can't access all the other stuff that's in there that's going to make life worth living. And that's kind of that leads to one of the things that I say forever, which is that stroke recovery is a three-pronged approach. It's a head, heart, and physical recovery. You have to do the emotional work, you have to do the psychological work, and you have to do um, the physical work. And and do you feel now that you have this ability to understand that you've got to tend to your emotions, that that's supporting your stroke recovery, your physical recovery, and your mental recovery?
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, um, I feel like without like tending to like the emotional recovery, it just felt like I was just like still living in that moment of fear when everything happened. Um, because sorry, I lost my train of thought.
That's all right.
One second.
I was
Um,
asking about how tending to your emotional recovery and being able to go there, has that helped you with your physical and your mental recovery after the stroke?
yeah, 100%. I think that um, once I was able to start like processing what had happened, I was able to, um, I think, put the energy that I was putting into just trying to get by. I was able to put that energy back into my recovery, whether it was like a physical aspect or like cognitive aspect. I felt like on the physical side of it, I was pretty fortunate to not have that many physical deficits after the stroke, but I had a lot of cognitive um, things that I was really struggling with, like my ability to use language and writing and reading. And um, I felt like that was really hard. And in some ways, like, I felt like at times I was only focusing on one, but I wasn't being that successful at it. And it wasn't until I would like look at all three aspects together that I was able to see improvement.
Yeah. It's really important to focus on your wins and see what you've done, either even if it's like minor, because it's
Mhm.
uplifting. It helps you feel better about yourself. And it just shows that there is progress and that you're getting to the other side, whatever that other side is, or wherever it is and whatever it looks like. But I think movement in any direction, kind of forward, whether you have to take a back movement or a side movement, it's all movement. And that's really the key here, is just to keep going and look
Yeah.
at every bump as it comes along.
It
And
definitely hasn't been linear. I feel like there's some days where I have some symptoms that are like they're worse than others. Like if I get really tired, I notice that things kind of come back and resurface, or if I'm really fatigued or like after I exert myself too much, it's like it's just not linear for me. It's been um, where it's like I'll have a really good day and then I'll have, a day where I'm not able to do that or I have to take a break. Um, yeah, I feel like the fatigue has been really hard.
yeah, when do you notice the fatigue gets worse? Is that, have you seen a pattern that kind of you'll become aware of? And then if so, are you starting to get in front of that to know what to do before the fatigue kicks in?
Mhm. I felt like going at first when I first got home from the inpatient center, everything was so exhausting. I remember like taking a shower would be exhausting and I would want to take a nap afterwards. Or like just basic self-care tasks were really exhausting. Or like making myself a meal was really exhausting. Going to the grocery store was really exhausting. And then that started to get a little bit more manageable. Um, and then things kind of like I was able to like increase my tolerance for things. But going back to work was the biggest challenge for me. I felt like I wasn't able to, I needed a lot more rest than I think I was able to get. So when I had to go back to work, um, I went back to work full time. I wish I had gone back part time and then increased to full time, but I didn't have that option because of my health insurance. And I really wish that I had had the option to go part-time and then full-time, because just jumping into full-time, I was so exhausted. I feel like after work, I wouldn't be able to talk to anyone. I would just like sleep.
Yeah, that's a common that's a common thing that happens. I'm gonna use the word mistake, but don't take it the bad way. Mistake is you've given it one take and now you have to do another take. And
Mm,
I did the same thing. I went back to work full time.
mhm.
But I didn't go back to my work. So I had a property maintenance business and that fell by the wayside and it was kind of bubbling away, but I couldn't really do any work. So I just walked away from everybody, my clients and everybody, and I just said, look, I'm done for now. And then I went and worked in an office job, and I hadn't done an office job for many, many years. And I didn't realize what an impact monitors, noise, people around me, lighting, traveling to work and back. I didn't realize what an impact it would have on me, and I was
Yeah,
wasted, and I wasn't
yeah,
useful even at work. And only reason I stayed there was because I had a friend of mine who gave me the job, who was the general manager there, who supported me. But nobody else understood why I was so flaky. And
yeah.
even though they knew I had a stroke, they couldn't understand
Mhm.
uh, how I was so unproductive.
Yeah, I felt like, so a little background about what I do for work. I'm a medical receptionist at an urgent care, and I've been a medical receptionist for like a few years now. So it was the job I had pre-stroke, um, and then that's the job I returned to. And I felt like pretty competent at my job before this. I had been doing it for a while. I kind of knew what to expect, and then afterwards, it was just like everything was hard, like typing was hard, looking at screens was hard. I remember my coworkers were really, really understanding. A lot of them knew what happened, um, and were really supportive and had, luckily, like a lot of them had some knowledge about the effects of stroke, um, because I worked in a medical setting. But I felt like when patients would come in, because I don't look like I had a stroke, no one would know unless I told them. Patients would get really impatient with me, when I would ask them to repeat something, or if I would make a mistake. It was really hard. I felt like people, um, my coworkers were really patient and supportive, but I felt like any customer facing job, um, people are kind of ruthless sometimes.
Customer service is so important. You have to be on your game all the time.
Mhm,
Even though I know I've been in customer service roles, before, and I know what it's about. Uh, and sometimes you're not on your game, but we've created such a customer service focused world where it's all about the customer experience that
mhm.
the customer has really high expectations.
Yeah, and also to be fair, like, there's been so many people that came into where I work that were so nice and so patient with me, and I had, like, a lovely time talking to, and it's really far and few between that people would be really impatient and sometimes upset with me, but,
And they're
yeah,
probably
it did stick out to me.
having one of the worst days of their life as well. They're probably sick. They come into a medical facility. They just need stuff done and they'll need to be fixed and they need to feel better and they probably got work to go back to. Who knows what's going on? It's legitimate that they're impatient. It's not
Mhm.
nice when you're on the receiving end of it. And
Yeah, that's the thing, is like I understood, I understand that it's like people wanted, you know, I think in some ways I was ready to go back to work, but in other ways I definitely wasn't at first. Now I feel like I've gotten a better handle on things, but at first I didn't feel like competent at my job.
yeah, did it was even though you kind of overdid it by going back full time and it wasn't necessarily in your control, do you feel like pushing yourself a little further than where your comfort zone was helped you kind of get better than you were? you know, that little push that we
Yeah,
give ourselves, I can go beyond, where we go beyond our limit, and then we can
mhm.
go, oh my gosh, I'm crashing. But I know now where my limit is, and I know how to approach it more more gingerly. Did you experience that?
Yeah, I noticed, I noticed really big improvements with my typing, and my processing speed, like, right away because it was this repetitive task that I was doing every day, and I feel like prior to going back to work, I would work on it with, like, my occupational therapist that I was, with, and we would do it, but, like, it wasn't the whole day, it would be, like, an hour, that we would work on something together, and then all of a sudden, when you're kind of thrown in, it's like you really have to. You don't really have another choice, so I felt like um I felt like I saw a big improvement in my recovery after going back to work, even if it was really exhausting.
So it sounds like a little bit of intense therapy at the same time as,
Yeah, it felt like a boot camp for, like, recovery.
yeah. Okay. So, not necessarily fully competent at work, but really doing a good job in recovering motor skills and increasing your tolerance to fatigue and all that kind of
Yeah,
stuff.
and now I feel fully competent, and now I feel like I've gotten, like, a good handle on things, and, I feel like I'm way more capable at doing my job the way I wanna do it, um, but yeah, it was really hard to go back at first.
Yeah. You know, the days when you're feeling a little bit down, low, fatigued, etc. What what's kind of how does that come about? So for me, having a bad night's sleep, even now, 11 years out, even now, will mean that my morning is really a lot harder than it needs to be. But sometimes I can't. It's not my I didn't cause the lack of sleep that particular night. Something
Mhm.
happened. I woke up. I couldn't get back to sleep. So, what do you feel like contributes to you having a bad day? Do you have any things that you know definitely contribute to you having a bad day the next day or the day after?
Yeah, I felt like when I would overexert myself, I would notice, like, the next day, it was just, so much fatigue. I felt like I really wanted to push myself to kind of going back to, like, my old life, prior to this, and I would still wanna hang out with my friends, and I would wanna go out, and I would want to go do things, and I remember, like, the first time I tried to go to a concert, um, post-stroke, and I was so tired the next day. It took me, like, 2 days to just, like, lay in bed and recover because I was so exhausted. Or, like, I would, wanna go out, with my friends, and I couldn't keep up, or I would just be so exhausted, I'd have to go home early, or, um so I noticed that was a big trigger for, like, me feeling really low the next day, even though I think, like, emotionally it's good to connect with other people. I had to adjust the settings I was able to do it in. Um, and then if I have, like, a stretch of days at work where I'm working days in a row, I'll notice that, like, I need a day off to recover. If I don't sleep well, I notice that too.
Yeah. The concert thing's interesting because I had a couple of opportunities to attend some concerts and I didn't go on purpose because I felt like, as much as I loved going to the concert, I'd be paying the price for a couple of days later. But then,
That's exactly how I felt, yeah.
yeah, but then I felt at some stage I got to the point, well, I'm prepared to pay the price to go and see that particular artist, for example, because I'm going to have a great time there, even though when I leave there, I'll be tired and overwhelmed because there'll be too much noise, too much light,
Mhm,
and I'll have sensory overload. It'll be
mhm,
still worth the experience because I can at least say I saw my favorite artist live one time,
mhm.
So there was that. And then that also meant that I was finding ways to get out of going to the football when people would invite me or to other sports. And it'd be, oh man, there's 2 hours of sitting and screaming at the umpire or the referee about a decision they made is going to be really difficult for me to
Mhm.
come away from feeling okay about. And it's never watching sport on TV, for example, is you sit on your couch, you watch TV, and then you're at home magically when the
Yeah.
game's over.
Yeah, and you can kind of remove any, like, sensory information when you feel comfortable with it. I had so many issues with, like, sensory overload and overwhelm. I still do.
Do you guys at your place share the space in with regards to the lighting, television, and all that kind of thing? Because with my wife, we are now there's we're in two different worlds. I've got to have no lights overhead on pretty much all
Mhm.
at night. I've got to just put on lamps, and she
Mhm.
likes to have a bright lit room, so she's got to
Yeah.
deal with my lack of lighting. And then volume is a weird thing because she doesn't mind having the volume a little bit loud, and I try to have it a little bit lower because it overwhelms me. So, do you guys navigate that sort of stuff in your place?
Yeah, I mean, it was hard at first. I feel like, um, early on, like, I couldn't tolerate bright lights at all, so I would always wanna turn off all the lights in the house, or I'd wanna have really dim lighting, and I would want it to be really quiet, and I would wanna, close the blinds all the time, and I remember sometimes we would be like, "I can't see, it's so dark in here, like, can we just turn on one light?" And, but she was a really good sport. I feel like she definitely compromised on my behalf when it came to, like, the lighting and, like, the sound. Um, but yeah, it was a big adjustment. I felt like I have my own space in the house that we live in, like, I have my own room and I have, privacy, so it was really important for me just to have, like, a space where I could go and there wouldn't be anything overwhelming in. So that was my room, where it's like I could go to my room, I wouldn't have any noise in my room, I could turn off the lights or I could make the lights really dim, and, like, if anything was really stressful in the outside world, like, I needed a place where I could go where it wasn't.
Where you can retreat?
Mhm, and recharge, yeah.
Yeah, that's definitely me. At night in my bedroom, there's the most dimmest of dim lights where you can hardly see in there, but
Mhm.
it's enough to be lit so that it's not I'm in there and I need sleep time. It's that that moment when you're in your bedroom getting ready for bed, but you don't want it to be dark. You need a little bit of lighting around there, whatever you're
Mhm.
doing. So there's the dimmest of dim lights, and it's a really quiet room. I'll just go down there and lay for about sometimes 30 minutes, an hour before I actually switch the light off and roll over and doze off. My wife usually comes to bed a little later than me, um,
Mhm.
so I can, or maybe I go to bed a little earlier than I used to, and therefore I get to have that one half an hour to 1 hour time to kind of unwind before bed. Does that make sense?
Yeah, yeah, I feel like that's really important for me too. It's funny that we're talking about lighting because I have an overhead light in my room right now and I, like, rarely turn it on, but I turned it on for this podcast so you could see the screen. But I always have a lamp on instead.
Yeah, I appreciate that. And me too. So in front of me, there's a light right on top of my monitor.
Mhm.
Got two monitors. There's a light right in front of me. And it's, you can see as I do that, it's shining right into my eyeballs there. And then there's another one to my left. And you can see that when I do that, it's which part of me it's lighting. But if you look on if you look on YouTube, the best way to light a recording studio or a room when you're doing a podcast, this is how they tell you to do it. And if you don't do it like this, you're not doing it properly. so it's a I know, and I recorded another podcast episode just before this, an hour before our recording. I recorded another one. So this is going to be hour two in 3 hours that I'm recording two episodes, and it's
Mhm.
too much. And I can feel that like kind of burning and etching something into my brain. I can totally feel it, and I can feel this one. And I don't know if that's weird, but I experience light differently. I experience it
Yeah.
physically. I can actually feel the light, and that's not a warm light. That's like an LED, the most. you know, pathetic little excuse for a light you've ever seen, but I can actually feel its impact as if I was outside and the sun was shining on my
Yeah.
body.
I feel like I hit a wall sometimes, like with sensory input. Just where like if things are too loud or too bright or like I feel like I shut down sometimes still.
Yeah. As we're coming to the end of this episode, I want to ask you a couple of questions. Maybe you can answer,
Mhm.
maybe you can't, but I just want to get your thoughts on that. What's the hardest thing about the stroke?
Mm, I think the hardest thing, which also I think you can look at it two different ways. The hardest thing, I think I felt so alone and isolated. I didn't um and I'll circle back to the other part of what I was going to say here, but I didn't know anyone that was my age that had a stroke. I felt like all of the like recovery information I heard about was typically at people in different stages of life than me, and I didn't know how to adapt it for my own life. Um, and it was really scary. It felt really lonely and isolating. And, I think for me, that was the hardest part to grapple with was just this like immense sadness that like I was just alone in this experience. But then on the flip side, I think because I've had a stroke, I've been able to find so many experiences, like talk to other people that have had experiences like mine. Um, I found your podcast through my endless Google searches about I type in like young um, stroke survivors podcast, stroke survivor books. Like I try to find just any information I can about it because I think I felt so alone and isolated and I didn't find any information at first. But the more I've kind of gone through this recovery process, like the more I found connection through this experience. Just like with what you were saying, how like, we get the chance to talk to each other. And I've been able to talk to other people that have had traumatic brain injuries that are around my age and share those experiences. And I think that's also a gift. And then I hope that like me sharing my experience, someone will feel less alone.
Yeah, that's great. Tell me about, so you might have kind of alluded to this in the last answer, but what has stroke taught you?
Mm, it's taught me that I'm resilient. Um, it's taught me that a lot of the things I thought mattered didn't matter, and a lot of the things I wasn't giving enough time and energy to, how important they are. I think I took a lot of people in my life for granted, and things in my life for granted because I just thought that they were always going to be there. And I feel like a really big level of appreciation for like my loved ones and my life. And, I feel like if I go on a walk and it's sunny outside and just like being able to walk is fantastic. It's phenomenal. And I feel so lucky to be able to do that because I know that, that feels like a gift now.
Yeah, I have a coaching client who just being able to go to his favorite beach location, even in his wheelchair, um, which he hasn't been able to do for 4 months because he had a really terrible experience with stroke and then he's in recovery and they've just got home, but he felt isolated and stuck inside the house, right?
Mhm.
So just being able to work with him and his partner to just get them to work out how they could get to the beach, even if it was for just half an hour or whatever, was a big win. It made a
Yeah.
big difference to how he felt emotionally, just being able to experience some simple joys, right? That's kind of what you're saying. The final question is, what would you like to tell other people that are listening, that are going through what we've been through? What would you like to leave them with? Maybe a word of wisdom, some thoughts of wisdom, or just anything at all. What would you like to tell them?
I think I think for people that have gone through something similar, um, just that it does get better. recovery looks different for everyone. And I know that there are so many different forms of recovery that you can have post stroke. But, if you keep giving it time, you know, it felt really hopeless at first for me, but it gets better. I think that's something I would want to tell people. That's something I would want to hear myself. Um, and then for people that maybe haven't experienced a stroke, um, just, you never know what someone else is experiencing. And that goes way beyond just a traumatic brain injury or a stroke. Like, we don't know other people's lives. We don't know what they've experienced, what they've been through. So I think just having patience with people and empathy.
Yeah, they're really lovely words. I think I agree with that. One of the things I'm really grateful for is the fact that now I know what other people are going through. And I've said it before in a few episodes that when I saw somebody in a wheelchair, I just assumed they were sitting down. And that didn't mean much to me. Um,
Mhm.
but it's just, I got to spend, say, 3 or 4 weeks in a wheelchair, and I really learned deeply and very, very rapidly that I wasn't just sitting down, that I was dealing with a whole bunch of shit that
Mhm.
I had to come to terms with, as well as the fact that I had to be in a wheelchair, that I couldn't walk anymore, and somebody had to help me get around in the beginning. And yeah, that ability to empathize and see what's going on for other people because of my experience has been uh, probably one of the more eye-opening parts of this. And I'm so glad uh, I'm not that ignorant anymore. I'm not as ignorant as I was, and I'm okay. I'm okay with the fact that I was ignorant, in that you've never been through it, so how can you possibly know? But the fact that I've learned that, um, I can relate to what you're saying. It's really helpful.
Yeah. Yeah. I think, yeah, that's a gift I've taken from this experience as well.
Suzanne, thank you so much for reaching out and being on the show. I really appreciated our chat, and I think a lot of people will get a lot out of listening to your story.
Thank you for having me.
Thanks for joining us on today's episode. To learn more about Suzanne and to download a full transcript of the entire interview, please go to recoveryafterstroke.com/episodes. If you would like to try the course 5 Foods to Avoid After Stroke, go to recoveryafterstroke.com/courses to get on board now. If you have been listening for a while and love this podcast, please help the podcast to reach more stroke survivors by leaving the show a 5-star review and a few words about what the show means to you on iTunes and Spotify. If you're watching on YouTube, comment below the video. Like this episode, and to get notifications of future episodes, subscribe to the show on the platform of your choice. Any interaction with the show boosts the show's ranking on search engines, and that means that more people who need to find the show will, and that might make them feel better about their recovery. If you are a stroke survivor with a story to share about your experience, come and join me on the show. The interviews are not scripted. You do not have to plan for them. All you need to do to qualify is be a stroke survivor, care for someone who is a stroke survivor, or you're one of the fabulous people that help stroke survivors. Go to recoveryafterstroke.com/contact, fill out the contact form, and as soon as I receive your request, I will respond with more details on how you can choose a time that works for you and me to meet over Zoom. Thanks again for being here and listening. I truly appreciate you. See you on the next episode.
Importantly, we present many podcasts designed to give you an insight and understanding into the experiences of other individuals. Opinions and treatment protocols discussed during any podcast are the individual's own experience, and we do not necessarily share the same opinion, nor do we recommend any treatment protocol discussed. All content on this website and any linked blog, podcast, or video material controlled this website or content is created and produced for informational purposes only and is largely based on the personal experience of Bill Gassiamas. The content is intended to complement your medical treatment and support healing. It is not intended to be a substitute for professional medical advice and should not be relied on as health advice. The information is general and may not be suitable for your personal injuries, circumstances, or health objectives. Do not use our content as a standalone resource to diagnose, treat, cure, or prevent any disease for therapeutic purposes or as a substitute for the advice of a health professional. Never delay seeking advice or disregard the advice of a medical professional, your doctor, or your rehabilitation program based on our content. If you have any questions or concerns about your health or medical condition, please seek guidance from a doctor or other medical professional. If you are experiencing a health emergency or think you might be, call 000 if in Australia, or your local emergency number immediately for emergency assistance, or go to the nearest hospital emergency department. Medical information changes constantly. While we aim to provide current, quality information in our content, we do not provide any guarantees and assume no legal liability or responsibility for the accuracy, currency, or completeness of the content. If you choose to rely on any information within our content, you do so solely at your own risk. We are careful with links we provide. However, third-party links from our website are followed at your own risk, and we are not responsible for any information you find there.